And then it happens again. You wake at 3:17 a.m. Sheets damp, heart buzzing like a dozen iPhones on vibrate inside your chest, and your hand goes straight to your abdomen because it feels different every month. You eat carefully, you walk, you do what they told you, and still your waist thickens while you sleep. So tell me honestly, how did nobody explain this to you? Look, this is clinical, not in your head. About 80% of OBGYN residents report minimal menopause training. Roughly 75% of symptomatic women go untreated, and 1 in 5 are dismissed in the exam room. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to see how far this conversation is reaching. Now, hear the part they skipped. After menopause, estradiol can fall by about 95%, and your brain, your sleep circuits, your stress response, your metabolic signaling all feel that drop long before anyone says the word menopause out loud. Instead, you get the old line, eat less, move more, this is aging, and you start doubting your own body. I'm telling you now, the worst part of this pattern is not what you've been told. It's what you haven't been told yet. And by the end of this conversation, you'll see exactly why this was never your fault. It's 3:17 a.m. Again, your shirt is damp, your heart is fluttering, and your hand goes straight to your waist because your body feels different even when your routine has not changed. You're eating carefully, walking, trying to sleep, and still the scale and your midsection move in the wrong direction. You are not crazy. You are not alone. In clinic data and patient reports, this pattern is everywhere. About 80% of OBGYN residents report little menopause training, roughly 75% of symptomatic women go untreated, and about 1 in 5 women are dismissed when they ask for help. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this conversation is reaching. Now listen closely, because this is where the silence usually starts. During your cycling years, estradiol often sits around 50 to 500 pg per milliliter, and after menopause, it can land near 0 to 20 pg per milliliter, a biologic collapse your brain, sleep circuits, and stress response feel immediately. Then you get told it's just aging, or stress, or a willpower issue, and you start doubting yourself instead of questioning the model. The silence ends in this room. And what I'm about to show you next is the missing cortisol pattern that explains not just the weight gain, but why it hits hardest at night in ways you were never warned about. Here is how this door started closing, and it did not start with you. Your mother may have called it nerves. Your grandmother may have said nothing at all, because nobody gave them language for night waking, panic waves, or a body that changed without permission. Then 2002 hit, and one study headline scared a whole generation before nuance could catch up. Most women in that trial were around age 63, not newly menopausal, but that distinction got lost in exam rooms. In a moment, I'll show you how that single fear rewired what doctors were willing to discuss with you. After that, prescribing behavior dropped fast, and teaching never recovered the ground. In many training programs, menopause education stayed under 1 hour, so new clinicians learned to manage pregnancy, surgery, cancer screening, but not the endocrine transition you lived through for decades. That gap was not malicious, but it was real, and you felt it as dismissal. Add insurance rules that approve fragments of care while denying integrated follow-up, and you get 5-minute visits for a full-body hormonal shift. Keep listening, because the next layer is why your nighttime symptoms can worsen even when your daytime routine stays steady. Then culture did its part. Women over 50 disappeared from media unless they were selling a fix. Friends learned to perform fine, and search results pushed expensive cortisol hacks before clinical education. So you walked into appointments already primed to doubt yourself, and too often left with stress as the whole explanation. I'll tell you honestly, this is where isolation usually turns into recognition, because once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. And if this goes unaddressed, the window for easier intervention narrows, while sleep fragmentation and central weight gain harden into your new baseline. Look, this was never one bad appointment. It was a chain. Training programs taught doctors to track your PAP, your pregnancy risk, your blood pressure, but not the hormone transition that can start years before your final period. Then the post-WHI fear narrative flattened nuance, so risk was discussed without timing context, and menopause care got treated like elective conversation instead of core medicine. Meanwhile, insurance workflows rewarded brief symptom coding, not longitudinal pattern recognition. And you were the one carrying the cost, especially if you were in late perimenopause or already postmenopause and still told to wait it out. Now add the market layer. While clinics stayed inconsistent, the wellness machine sold powders, apps, and cortisol fixes to women desperate for relief, because confusion is profitable and clear physiology is slower to sell. In the U.S., roughly 2 million women enter menopause each year, and the average final period is near age 51. So this is not edge case medicine. It is everyday medicine that was sidelined. You may spend more than 1/3 of your life after that transition. So, no, nothing is wrong with your character. The next piece is what your cortisol rhythm does in the first half of the night when estrogen buffering falls. Look, the first layer is hormonal signaling, and it is bigger than anyone told you. You have estrogen receptors in over 400 tissues, not just reproductive organs. So when that signal drops, your stress network and your metabolic controls lose buffering together. Cortisol is supposed to stay low near midnight and rise later, but in this transition it can jump early, right in that 2 to 4 a.m. window when you wake up wired and confused. Most women get told, "That's stress," and the conversation ends there. But stress is the label, not the mechanism, and the brain layer is where this gets even clearer. In 30 years of practice, I have seen this exact pattern thousands of times. And I need to tell you something personal. At 52, I stood in my kitchen before dawn, bare feet on cold tile, pulse pounding in my throat, and I had this sharp fear that I was losing myself. I was not. In controlled menopause sleep research, fragmented sleep raised bedtime cortisol by 27% and cut the cortisol awakening response by 57%, which means the next day starts already dysregulated. So when anxiety and fog feel psychiatric, the endocrine trigger can be sitting underneath it. And we still have not touched the metabolic cascade. Now the third layer, and this is where women blame themselves hardest. These shifts compound. They do not cancel out. You can have HPA axis disruption, rising insulin resistance, mood vulnerability, and genitourinary atrophy symptoms at the same time, and each one amplifies the others. Perimenopause is linked with about a 40% higher risk of depressive symptoms, and that gets mistaken for a primary mental health disorder when hormone context is ignored. Vaginal atrophy is treated like fate when it is treatable, and testosterone is almost never tested in a serious way. Stay with me, because next I'm going to lay out the exact clinical sequence so your symptoms finally line up. Let me explain what is actually happening in your body. This shift does not start on the day your periods stop. It starts earlier, quietly. In late transition years, More than 60% of cycles can become anovulatory, so your progesterone support drops out without warning, and many women no longer reach the mid-luteal pattern above 6 nanograms per milliliter that used to steady sleep and calm the stress response. So you fall asleep tired, then wake up wired, and by morning you think you failed again. You did not fail. The question is what that broken night does to fat signaling before breakfast. Here is the next layer. Sleep architecture changes in measurable ways. In symptomatic midlife women, REM latency has been observed around 94.2 minutes versus 71.4 minutes in women without those symptoms. That means your brain spends more time in lighter, less restorative patterns, and cortisol gets more chances to spike. At the same time, Swan heart data showed visceral fat rising about 8.2% per year in the acceleration window, then 5.8% per year after, even when habits looked stable on paper. So if routine stayed steady, what pushed storage to your abdomen anyway? I had a patient last month. I will call her Sarah. She sat right where you are and told me, I feel like I am disappearing in my own body. She was waking in panic before dawn, doing long walks, eating carefully, still getting a thicker waist. Her FSH was 46 MIU per milliliter, fasting insulin was 18 UIU per milliliter, glucose still looked acceptable, and that is the trap. I told her this was a neuroendocrine pattern, estrogen withdrawal, cortisol reactivity, and insulin oversignaling pushing fuel into visceral storage. She went quiet, then said, "So this is physiology, not me?" Exactly. And then comes the harder part. The harder part is this. When stress sleep disruption stays untreated in menopause, risk patterns for visceral fat accumulation rise by about 1/4 to nearly 2/5 over time, and early postmenopause can bring roughly a 1/3 to near 1/2 acceleration in insulin resistance. That is why old advice feels insulting, because you are fighting a signal problem with a willpower tool. High nighttime cortisol tells your liver to release glucose, insulin rises to manage it, and your abdomen becomes the preferred storage site while you are literally in bed. So what happens if this continues month after month without a targeted clinical response? Then bone enters the story, and this is where denial gets expensive. Around the transition window, lumbar spine density can decline at about 2.5% per year, femoral neck around 1.8% per year, then slow to roughly 1.1% per year later, but the early hit is the one most women never hear about in real time. So you are told to just eat less and exercise more while 3 systems are shifting at once: sleep, glucose handling, and bone turnover. Once you see that, the old model collapses. And in the next step, I need to show you the exact moment that collapse becomes undeniable. The turning point is quieter than people expect. It happens on an ordinary week when you keep the same meals, the same walks, the same discipline, and your nights still fracture, your heart still races before dawn, your abdomen still feels tighter by morning. That is when the old story dies. You realize the equation you were handed cannot explain your body anymore. Cortisol surges when sleep breaks. Insulin answers, storage shifts, and exhaustion follows, even when effort stays high. That is not aging. That is a hormone shift nobody explained to you. What does that cost if it keeps going? Look, honestly, if this lands like a punch, that reaction makes sense. The anger you feel is clean, because somewhere along the line, this conversation was treated as optional care, and you were left to blame yourself for a biology you were never taught to recognize. Your mother likely carried it in silence, and now it reached you with better lab access, but the same old dismissal. You are not crazy. You are not alone. Your body is not betraying you. It has been ignored. And once you see that, you cannot unsee what untreated years can take from mood, bone, and identity. If this silence keeps running your care for the next 1 to 3 years, the first cost is the night itself. Hot flashes and night sweats can keep cycling for 7 to 14 years when untreated, and each broken night stacks on the next one like unpaid debt in your nervous system. You wake exhausted, then wired, then ashamed that your mood is shorter and your patience is thinner. Libido drops, connection gets strained, and you start apologizing for symptoms you never chose. The question is not whether this affects your life. The question is how much longer you can carry it alone. And here is what I see in real rooms, not theory. The more this goes unnamed, the more personal you make it. You start rewriting your identity around failure, even while your physiology is signaling for targeted care. Brain fog stops feeling occasional and starts feeling like you are losing words you used to own. Irritability becomes the spark in conversations that used to feel safe. You can love your family and still feel unreachable inside your own skin. So if this is the short horizon, what happens in the medium window when bone and vascular risk begin to accelerate? Between 3 and 10 years, the biology gets less forgiving. Bone loss can reach about 20% in the first 5 to 7 years after menopause, and that shift can happen while routine labs still look fine on paper. At the same time, estrogen's vascular buffering is gone, so cardiometabolic risk rises quietly in the background, not with drama, with drift. Genitourinary syndrome tends to progress, not self-correct, which means dryness, urgency, pain, and recurrent infections can become chronic without proper treatment. If that sounds like a lot, it is, and this still is not the final layer. Now stretch the timeline to 10 to 30 years, and you start seeing the consequence of decades lived inside partial explanations. About 1 in 2 women over 50 will face an osteoporotic fracture, and fracture is not just a bone event, it can become an independence event. Cognitive vulnerability can rise when a neuroprotective hormone environment is never addressed, and cardiovascular disease remains the leading killer of older women. This is where many patients tell me it feels like the silence was passed down like an heirloom. So what does this mean for the fear you feel today, right now? Right now, the psychological load is already measurable. Anxiety is reported by roughly 70% of women in this transition, and depression risk can double in perimenopause. That means the shame you feel is not proof you are weak. It is often the emotional scar of being misread for too long. Isolation grows because everyone around you performs "I'm fine," and you start thinking you are the exception instead of the pattern. Tell me in the comments which of these consequences you are living right now, or which one you were told was just stress. This is not personal failure. This is inherited silence with measurable physical cost. If nothing changes in the next 1 to 3 years, the first thing you lose is recovery, not motivation. Recovery. You go to bed tired, wake at that same pre-dawn hour with your heart running, and start each morning already behind your own biology. Hot flashes keep interrupting sleep, and when sleep breaks often enough, mood control gets thinner, cravings get louder, and self-blame gets cruel. You begin apologizing for being irritable when what is really happening is neuroendocrine strain night after night with no one naming it clearly in the room. Then, in the 3 to 10 year window, the costs move from frustrating to structural. Bone turnover outpaces replacement, and many women can lose up to 1/5 of bone mass in the early postmenopause years without any dramatic warning sign. Cardiometabolic risk drifts upward in the background, while routine visits still sound reassuring. Vaginal and urinary symptoms that felt occasional can become persistent because these tissues are hormone responsive and rarely self-correct when the underlying shift stays untreated. This is where women tell me, quietly, I don't feel like myself anymore, and they mean it literally. Stretch that horizon to 10 to 30 years, and the consequences become harder to reverse. About half of women over 50 will experience an osteoporotic fracture, and that is not just a bone statistic, it can become a mobility and independence event. Cardiovascular disease remains the leading long-term threat to women in this stage, and cognitive confidence can keep eroding when sleep, stress signaling, and metabolic strain are never addressed as one pattern. By then, what began as just bad sleep has rewritten daily life, relationships, and how safe you feel in your own body. And right now, in the present tense, the emotional load is already measurable. Anxiety symptoms are reported by a large majority of women in this transition, and depression risk rises during perimenopause, even in women with no prior history. So, when you feel ashamed, disconnected, or suddenly fragile in situations you used to handle easily, that reaction is not proof that you are weak. It is often what happens when a real physiologic shift gets mislabeled as personality, stress tolerance, or discipline failure for too long. Share below which of these consequences you are living right now, or tell me which one you were told was just stress or just aging, because naming it out loud is often the first clinical turning point. I read those comments, and I use them to keep pushing this conversation where it belongs, inside real medicine, not silence. If one line today made something click, say that too, in your own words. This is not personal failure. This is inherited silence with measurable physical cost. Tomorrow morning, bring a written script so the visit cannot drift. Doctor, have you completed any continuing education in menopause management in the last 5 years? Then, I'd like to request a full hormone panel including estradiol, progesterone, testosterone, and thyroid. Ask for tests by name: comprehensive hormone panel, beyond standard TSH, FSH if perimenopause stage is unclear, fasting insulin if weight gain persists, and a DEXA scan for bone density if you are over 50. If you are dismissed, say this exactly: I understand my labs may appear within standard range. I'm experiencing sleep disruption, abdominal weight gain, and anxiety, and I'd like these investigated as potential hormonal causes, not dismissed as stress or aging. If the room still minimizes you, pivot to a menopause-trained clinician. Use the Menopause Society directory, check for MSCP credentials or older NCMP/NAMS listings, and verify active licensure plus menopause-focused continuing education. Ask, how do you evaluate symptom chronology, sleep disruption, cortisol patterning, and insulin resistance in menopause? Keep your tone calm and specific, not confrontational. This is hard. You are asking a system that failed you to suddenly serve you. But now you have the language it responds to. You are not failing. You were never told the truth about what was happening to you. You are not a woman with a failing body. You are a woman with clinical understanding and practical tools to demand the care you deserve. Before you leave, sit with this for a second. If your body changed while your effort stayed the same, then the story you were handed was wrong from the start. The silence ends in this room. And here is the question I want to stay with you tonight. How many years did you spend believing this was just aging when it was an untreated hormone stress cascade building while you slept? Once you see that pattern, you cannot unsee it, and the next conversation you have in a clinic can alter the next chapter of your life. In the next video, I'll walk you through the next layer, the exact 5-minute questions that reveal whether a clinician is truly menopause trained or about to give you another round of dismissal. Share your story below, or tell me what you needed to hear today that no one has ever said to you clearly. I read everyone. Your body is not betraying you. It has been managed by a system that never learned to hear it. Take care of yourself. I will see you in the next one. Before we end, do one thing for yourself tonight. Name what happened to you. Share your story below. I read everyone. Tell me what you needed to hear today that no one said in your exam room, or leave a comment and tell me if this finally made something click in your body and your mind at the same time. Say it plainly, in your own words. Not to perform, not to be polite. To stop carrying this alone in silence. In the next video, I'll walk you through the exact conversation that tells you quickly whether a clinician understands menopause medicine or is about to dismiss you again. Bring your notes, bring your symptoms, bring your questions, and bring the language you have now. This is where confusion ends and direction begins. No drama, no false comfort, no more guessing. Take care of yourself. I will see you in the next one.